What if the secret to overcoming earthly lack has been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath centuries of mistranslated Greek texts? By returning to the original Aramaic frequency of ALAHA, we can finally bypass the scarcity mindset of the ego. It is time to bridge the gap between material struggle and the infinite overflow of the pleroma. The word translated in your Bible as God is not what Jesus actually spoke. When Jesus stood at the edge of the desert, when he silenced storms, when he multiplied bread from nothing, he was not calling on a distant deity. He was vibrating with a frequency so ancient, so precise, that creation itself had no choice but to respond. That frequency was encoded in a single Aramaic declaration. ALAHA, not the Greek theos, not the Latin dias. Allah, Aya, 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 a word that carries divine presence as its very sound. This is not theology. This is not religion. This is frequency, and it was given to you. Most people will never hear this, because most people are reading translations of translations of translations. But you are here now. That is not an accident. Aramaic is not just a language. It is a sacred vibration, and to ensure you capture every nuance of the frequency that Jesus used, I have prepared a visual pronunciation guide that will appear on your screen. Observe the symbols and phonetics as we hear the sound together, so that your intention is in perfect harmony with the word. Stay until the very end of this video, because I will hand you something that very few people have ever received: the complete sovereignty protocol, drawn directly from the teachings of Jesus himself. When Jesus taught, he did not speak Greek. He did not speak Latin. He spoke Aramaic, a language so ancient it predates the formalized Hebrew of the temple scribes. This distinction is not merely linguistic. It is spiritual. Every Aramaic word carries within it a sonic architecture that Greek simply cannot contain. When the early councils chose to canonize Greek translations of Jesus' original teachings, something was inevitably left behind. Something vibrational, something alive. The word ALAHA is perhaps the greatest casualty of that translation. In Greek, it became theosa, a masculine, singular deity, standing apart from creation. But ALAHA, in Aramaic, means something far more encompassing. It points to the divine ground of all being, the unified field from which all life emerges, the presence that does not exist outside the world but as the world. The Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 33, records Jesus saying, "Seek first the kingdom." In Aramaic, the original instruction vibrates with ALAHA as its living center, not as a being to petition, but as a frequency to inhabit. This single shift changes everything about how abundance, sovereignty, and lack are understood in the teachings of Jesus. Scarcity, in this framework, is not a material problem. It is a vibrational displacement, a moment when the human soul has drifted out of alignment with the field of ALAHA fear. Anxiety and earthly lack are not punishments. They are signals. They are the soul's way of communicating that it has forgotten what it is. When Jesus spoke ALAHA, he was not praying to something external. He was declaring his own nature and yours. That declaration is the sovereignty code. And once you understand it, lack loses its grip entirely. Before we can dissolve lack, we must understand its structure. Lack is not a condition of the material world. Lack is a frequency. And like all frequencies, it can be interrupted and replaced. The Aramaic understanding of consciousness, preserved in mystical traditions that trace directly to Jesus and his circle, teaches that the human mind operates in two registers. The first is the ego register, what ancient Aramaic teachers called the nafs, the self that believes itself to be separate, limited, and alone. The second is the ALAHA register, the self that knows itself to be an expression of the infinite. Earthly lack originates entirely in when the mind contracts into the identity of separation, it generates fear. That fear then shapes perception, and perception shapes reality. The person who believes they are lacking begins to move through the world in ways that confirm and perpetuate that lack. This is not metaphor. Modern neuroscience now confirms what Jesus demonstrated 2,000 years ago. A brain in a fear state cannot access the same creative, intuitive, and relational capacities as a brain in an open, connected state. Jesus knew this not as science, but as lived truth, when he said in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 6, verse 25, Do not be anxious about your life. He was not offering comfort. He was issuing a vibrational directive. Ewa saying exit the frequency of lack. Return to ALAHA. Operate from the ground of infinite being, and you will find that the universe itself reorganizes to meet you there. The words of Jesus in Aramaic open different pathways back to divine alignment. Each one represents a frequency capable of restoring something fragmented in human consciousness. Understanding these frequencies is the first step, but mastering their vibration in your daily life is where the true miracle happens. Aramaic words carry a sound dimension that is deeply vibrational, and some of these pronunciations may reach your ears slightly differently depending on how they are rendered. To help you embody each frequency with precision, I created a collection of 5 sacred study guides, each one dedicated to a specific Aramaic declaration and its practice. Inside, you'll find the correct pronunciation, guided meditations, and daily activation rituals. The link is pinned in the comments. Your deeper transformation begins there. The concept of sovereignty in the teachings of Jesus has been almost entirely lost to institutional religion. What most people understand as submission, bowing to an external god, is, in the original Aramaic framework, something completely different. It is an act of recognition. It is the soul returning to its own nature. ALAHA, at its root, carries the vibration of all-encompassing presence. The ancient Aramaic root, Allah, does not refer to a being who commands from above. It refers to the unified field itself, the divine substance from which all things arise, and to which all things return. When Jesus aligned himself with ALAHA, he was not surrendering his power. He was anchoring it. This is the sovereignty code in its purest form. Sovereignty, in the Aramaic sense, is not dominance over others. It is dominion over the frequency you emit. It is the capacity to remain rooted in divine presence, even when the material world presents the appearance of lack, danger, or chaos. The disciples who witnessed Jesus multiply loaves of bread in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, were not watching a magic trick. They were witnessing what happens when a consciousness fully saturated with ALAHA encounters a situation of apparent lack. The frequency of infinite supply, embodied completely, reorganizes the material field. What was insufficient becomes more than enough. This is not reserved for Jesus alone. The entire arc of his teaching points in one direction. You are capable of this. The sovereignty he embodied is available to every human soul willing to return to ALAHA and release the contracted identity of the If something in you is shifting as you receive this teaching, trust that movement. It is your original nature recognizing itself. The 5 sacred study guides were designed to walk beside you as that remembrance deepens. Layer by layer, word by word, frequency by frequency. Each guide carries the full context of these sacred declarations. Their sound, their meaning, and their power to dissolve what no longer belongs to you. The link is pinned in the comments. Your return to wholeness has a next step. There is a concept in the mystical tradition surrounding Jesus that Greek translation rendered as pleroma, a word meaning fullness, totality, divine completeness, but long before the Greek interpreters gave it that name. The Aramaic-speaking communities who gathered around Jesus knew it simply as the living reality of Allah. The pleroma is not a place. It is not a realm you reach after death. In the framework that Jesus taught, the pleroma is the baseline reality of all existence. An infinite field of divine overflow from which lack is simply impossible. Lack is not part of ALAHA's nature. Lack is what happens when consciousness contracts away from ALAHA and identifies with the limited self. This is precisely why Jesus could face the desert, the storm, the cross itself, and remain unshaken. He was not drawing on human reserves. He was anchored in the pleroma. His consciousness was so saturated with the frequency of ALAHA that no external condition of lack could penetrate it. The desert offered no food, and yet he was nourished. The Seah raged, and yet he slept. The world collapsed around him, and yet he rose. Every moment of Jesus' earthly ministry was a demonstration of what becomes possible when a human being refuses to leave the frequency of divine fullness. Lack of money, lack of health, lack of purpose, lack of love, All of these collapse under the weight of a consciousness aligned with Allah. The tragedy of the centuries that followed is that the institutional church transformed these demonstrations into miracles to be admired rather than capacities to be embodied. But Jesus was never performing for an audience. He was teaching a frequency. He was showing what the sovereignty code looks like in a human life, and he intended for you to live it. Fear is the most sophisticated illusion the ego has ever constructed. It arrives dressed in logic, in statistics, in memories of past pain, in projections of future disaster. It speaks in the language of protection, of wisdom, of realism. And it is, in the Aramaic understanding, nothing more than a displacement from ALAHA. Jesus addressed fear more consistently than almost any other theme in his teachings. In the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, verse 31, he spoke the directive that has echoed through 2,000 years of spiritual practice. Do not be afraid. Not as consolation, as an energetic command, as an act of frequency mastery. To understand why Jesus returned to this directive so often, we must understand what fear actually does to the human energy field in the Aramaic mystical framework. Fear collapses the energetic field of the nafsha, the personal self, into a contracted state that is, be the Phoenician cut off from ALAHA. The soul in fear cannot perceive the pleroma. It cannot access the field of divine overflow. It is, in a very real sense, operating without its full capacity. This is not a moral failing. Jesus never condemned those who were afraid. He met them in the fear and then pointed them back to ALAHA. He held the frequency of sovereignty so completely that those around him could feel their own alignment stabilizing in his presence. That is what it means to be a teacher of the sovereignty code. But what Jesus also understood, and what his teachings make clear, is that no human being is permanently bound to the frequency of fear. The contracted self is not the true self. ALAHA is always closer than the fear. The return is always possible, and it begins with a single sound, a single declaration, a single moment of choosing the frequency of divine presence over the story the ego tells. The sovereignty protocol, this is what you stayed for. This is the practice that Jesus embodied and that you can now carry into your own life. The Aramaic word is ALAHA, pronounced ALAHA. The first syllable opens like a breath. The second rises LAH, as if calling upward toward an infinite sky. The third falls softly, ha, like the exhale that follows a moment of profound recognition. Together, the three syllables form a complete, energetic cycle. Opening, rising, releasing. This is not coincidence. Aramaic is a language built on the breath, and ALAHA was designed to move through the body, not merely the mind. When Jesus spoke this word, he was not reciting a name. He was performing an act of conscious alignment, reminding his entire being of what it was. Here is the sovereignty protocol, drawn directly from the pattern of Jesus' own practice. Choose a moment each morning before the noise of the day enters. Sit with your spine upright and your hands open in your lap, palms facing upward, as an act of receiving. Take 3 slow, conscious breaths, allowing the body to settle. Then, on your 4th exhale, speak ALAHA aloud. Let the word move from deep in the chest, not the throat. Feel the first syllable, ah, expand through the rib cage. Let La lift through the upper chest and the back of the skull. Let Ha fall out through the mouth, like a release. Do this 7 times. 7, in Aramaic mystical tradition, is the number of completion, the point at which an energetic cycle closes and a new one opens. With each repetition, hold this intention. I am not separate from the divine field. I do not operate from lack. I am an expression of ALAHA, infinite, complete, and sovereign. The expected effect, according to the pattern Jesus demonstrated, is a gradual but unmistakable shift in perception. The contracted ego begins to loosen. The sense of being alone in a scarce world begins to dissolve. In its place, a quiet certainty arises. The certainty that you are held, that the field of divine overflow is real, and that lack was always a misperception rather than a truth. Use ALAHA also in moments of acute fear or financial anxiety. When the mind begins to spiral, when lack feels most overwhelming and real, speak the word. not as a magic charm, as a frequency intervention, as a conscious act of returning to the ground of all being. Jesus did not reserve this practice for temples or synagogues. He spoke ALAHA in boats, in deserts, in gardens, at graves. Sovereignty is not a Sunday frequency. It is a moment-by-moment choice. Did you feel something shift today? Did these words touch something deeper in you? If they did, leave the word frequency activated in the comments. That is your confirmation that the light within you is moving. And when the light moves, it needs a path. Discover our complete collection of 5 sacred study guides created to carry your transformation beyond this moment. The link is pinned in the comments. Your next step is waiting. We are just scratching the surface of this ancient power. Get ready, because in our next video, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic codes that unlock spiritual authority you've never imagined. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss this unfolding revelation. This is only the beginning. Every week on this channel, we go deeper into the sacred Aramaic frequencies that Jesus used, codes that were always meant to be yours, teachings that were preserved precisely so that this generation could receive them. Subscribe now, turn on your notifications, and begin your practice of ALAHA today, because the sovereignty that Jesus demonstrated was never meant to live only in history. It was meant to live in you. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.